Let's get cracking into some of what you're keen to learn about moving forward with regards to the Healthy IT and Digital Organization webinar. As we discussed, or as we've portrayed, this is really about how to align your people and execute your strategies in a time of not just economic uncertainty, but all kinds of other forms of uncertainty as well. And as I said, my name is Avi Ratnanason. I'm the founder and CEO of NHS. And I also like to pay my respects to the people past and present, the elders past and present, for the land in which we stand, which is a traditional Australian custom as well for those of you who are joining us from overseas. So who am I? A little bit about myself. As I mentioned, my role is the founder and CEO of NHS. I am regarded by some as a thought leader in this space of people management, particularly for this industry. I am an author as well. I've recently released a book called People Strategy and Workforce Optimization, which we'll talk a little bit about. And I'm a consultant. I consult to organizations all around the world on these challenges. I'm a trainer and very much in the learning and development space, as well as an executive coach and mentor for CEOs right down to senior managers and middle managers on a variety of these challenges. Occasionally asked to do keynotes at conferences, both in Australia as well as internationally. And I've developed software, holding product leadership roles and being the visionary side of things as regards to software is concerned. So I'm coming from a place of having a lot of experience holding various different roles when providing some of this guidance and advice at today's webinar. But also my career is quite diverse. So I started my career as a medical doctor, both in the UK and in Australia, and bring a lot of expertise around human well-being and care, which we're seeing a lot of big themes coming out in HR and people management at the moment. But I've also held roles as a senior executive. I was chief of staff at Pfizer Australia, which is a billion-dollar business responsible for strategy and innovation. So really had a lot of experience over the years in terms of business growth and how do you commercialize products into a marketplace as a company and also as a business unit. But also I've been a tech entrepreneur for the last 10 years or so. We've won international awards, particularly one from the International Hospital Federation during COVID. And I've held 25 years experience in management and frontline roles. So I bring that diversity from not only across multiple industries, but also different levels of the hierarchy as an employee and as a leader as well. And so a lot of my perspectives and recommendations today will come from that space. NHS is a company. What do we do? Well, we do a combination of software and services. Essentially, our vision is to energize leaders and managers with more intelligent growth. So really helping you grow as a person, as a leader, and helping your business growth. And we do that through a number of ways, which I've just talked about already: consulting, mentoring, coaching, training. And we've done that across 5 countries with over 120 plus customers over the last 10 years. So a pretty established organization, and we continue to do this great work in the marketplace as well. On top of that, we are also developing augmented intelligence tools, which obviously, AI is a big topic at the moment, and there's a variety of tools that are being developed. And we'll talk about how that applies to your challenges in the moment. You might now be attending this session as an individual that's interested in the topic, or you might come from a small to medium enterprise, a not-for-profit, a large corporate, or you might be from public sector and government. We've worked across the entire span, and so there is no question that I think we can't really help you with, and I want to help you address them in this webinar as well. And so what we're going to cover today, we've talked about these objectives in the invite, but really talk about some of the impact of economic challenges in the tech workforce, particularly in the Australian context, but with relevance to many other countries around the world. How to actually craft the people deal. So thinking about how you invest and where you invest to solve some of these challenges in product development, recruitment, and change or transformation. Some practical approaches to engage and motivate your staff, particularly as you move from remote to hybrid, forging purpose and resilience, tailoring your employee value proposition to attract diversity with some case studies to back that up for the current climate as well. Now, obviously, it's a very rich agenda, so I'm going to be speaking quite quickly to cover a lot of the ground, but I can slow down and we'll have question time at the end also to address some of these perspectives. Now, one thing to reflect on before we begin, where do you sit, right? So there are many roles in IT departments, digital teams, technology organizations. And obviously you've got the customer at the center, but you've got roles in sales, customer service, technical support, some of you in product management, marketing, logistics, some of you in engineering, and there's a huge shortage of engineers, which you talk about. And some of you may be on the back end. Some of you may be in shared services like HR, finance, legal, and the sort of the operational IT side of, or DevOps, as some call it. So there are various different areas that you may sit, but this talk will be relevant for you irrespective of that role. Now, I'm just going to take one country here, which is Australia, and the current workforce climate. Now, many of you may already be aware that the unemployment rate's very low in Australia. It was 3.7%. Latest numbers are coming in at 3.5%, which is some of the lowest numbers in about 45 years of gathering this sort of data. So it's a very, very tight labor market in general. Having said that, there is a real sector dichotomy here in the sense that there's also a real impetus for growth in the tech sector. Australia is looking to create 1 million tech jobs by 2030, which is a huge ask. But the current forecast indicates that they're going to be about 186,000 jobs short in the tech sector by 2030, which is a huge shortage. So the desire to grow versus the current shortage is a question that hasn't been answered at the moment. Vacancy rates in technology teams are about 60% higher than in other sectors. And so those roles span digital technicians, software programmers. Cybersecurity is a big area where globally there is a shortage. And also the creative side, the commercial workers and so on, is predicted to have about 253,000 workers required, as well as those operational support workers in those shared service areas, which I've just talked about, are also going to be critical in that time. So it's a very hot area, it's a very in-demand area, but there's a lot of depth in terms of the data. At the same time, we're also seeing the mixed message of people being laid off in this sector. Many of you have heard of the big layoffs in the US market, Microsoft, Apple, SAP, and so on, and that flow through effect globally, which has occurred as well. And it's still looking like, the economy is going to be pretty soft, although not as bad as expected for some sectors, but globally, relatively soft economy. And so that economic outlook has an impact on how you manage your team and manage your business moving forward. If you break that down, what we've seen in a lot of organizations is, that wages going up as a result of the constrained supply. Companies then have certain revenue or profitability declining as well because overall demand has dropped. They then have recruitment challenges because you can't afford the higher salaries. Internally, you get these high workloads internally, some poor employee experiences and burnout as a result. Some of that's carried through from the pandemic days, but this high workloads, you still haven't gone on top of that, which can then result in poor project delivery, poor customer delivery, and a poor customer experience. That then results in turnover, workforce shortages, loss of revenue again, and that cycle of wage inflation continuing means that it's very difficult to try and continuously fill the bucket with staff, optimize the people whilst you have a leaky bucket of people leaving as well. So one of the things to really figure out or do is how do we break this vicious cycle, right? And we call it the strategic HR 8-step method. And that's what we're going to talk about today in this webinar, of breaking that cycle so you can improve delivery, customer experience, improve profitability, get on top of your hiring needs, and help the internal employees manage their workloads in a healthy and more productive way, such that it's sustainable for your team, for your department, and for your business as well. But that requires some strategic thinking and some strategic interventions. And what we're going to talk about today is the 8-step method on how you go about doing that cheaper, faster, better. And so that's really the core of what we're going to talk about today in terms of how do you go about doing this work in a more systematic fashion, in a strategic HR method in order to optimize your workforce. And you don't have to be in HR to do this. That's the key. HR is really a function that can help support it, but often CEOs, CFOs, team leaders, business unit leaders are the ones that often drive it, because the problem affects them and their KPIs and their productivity outcomes as well. So what is this method all about? So this 8-step method really covers the first step being aligning your people leaders. So this is a step where you need to bring your people together. And step 2 then is around clarifying and quantifying the problem statement. And we'll go into all of that in a lot of detail moving forward. Many organizations clarify what their problems are. Some don't. Certainly, many do not quantify the problem. Third step is about harnessing the voices of management, employees, and systems. So that's gathering data from your managers, your employees, and also your systems, whether that's Excel sheets right up to advanced HR information systems or AI. Fourth step is triangulating those in order to have some clear priorities or clear drivers. The fifth step is actually generating your best solution portfolio. The sixth one is articulating your strategy on a page. Seventh step is implementing a continuous improvement methodology, but also measuring performance more accurately than you've done before. And the last step, step 8, is going to be about aligning those enablers and process and systems. Now, this might seem like a lot of steps for you, but we're going to talk through them. And what we found through our research of working with over 200 CEOs, CFOs, HR directors, sales leaders, software and product leaders, is that if you follow the 8 steps, you will get to where you want to go. If you skip steps, that's when big problems occur. So some organizations do some steps well, and some don't do others well. So step 1 is about aligning your people leaders. Now, this can be literally getting your team into a room and working out the specific definition or problem statement. But in larger organizations, this may involve setting up a formal program, which involves a program sponsor, a program implementation lead, and involving certain members of the organization, whether it's the CEO, whether it's the team leader, HR leader. But one of the things we also recommend is including someone who's an analyst, someone who has that people analytics capability that can collect and analyze the data behind the problem as well. And on occasions, it's also about involving people who are not part of the formal hierarchy. These are the people champions. These are the people in the organization that are influential. They can influence others by their charisma, their charm, and have a way of bringing people on the journey, irrespective of their formal hierarchy. So these are all the kinds of people to involve in that step 1. Some organizations will do a more formal RACI matrix and lay out those roles and the degree in which they want to consult through those roles. These are some of the more mature, larger organizations, and we've worked across the spectrum. Step 2 is then to clarify the problem in your own business, department, or team. Now, when some organizations say, I've got very high turnover, what is that rate of turnover? Have you measured it? And have you measured it against the market median? So what is the turnover rate in the market, and what is that turnover rate in your roles? And are you normal or abnormal relative to what's going on in the marketplace? Just had a conversation with one organization just yesterday at a HR conference, and their turnover rate was 35%, but it's always been high, and that's in the sort of retail, frontline retail space. So it's one of those things where the business has to make a judgment call as to what is our problem? Can we measure it when it comes to our staffing? And have we been able to quantify that problem a certain way? Not only when it comes to the turnover rate, but there's also a cost to this. And typically, there is the cost of turnovers that's often not quantified. It is hidden. Many organizations have not quantified what it costs to actually put the ads out there in combination with the cost of how much do we pay in recruiter fees. In the last year, I was consulting to an organization that had only 300 staff, which might be considered small by some. large by others or medium-sized by others. And this organization was paying about $1 million a year in recruiter fees, right? And it took them active effort to actually make that calculation that realized, oh boy, maybe we should be spending that money differently or elsewhere, perhaps in retention strategies, rather than spending it all on trying to fill the bucket. Have we got our investment portfolio right? So there's cost involved in temporary staff, agency staff to cover certain positions, cost involved in training new hires, lost productivity, the loss of revenue. Just advising one organization where when a staff member leaves, they lost 15 customers, accounts, as a result of a salesperson moving to another organization, bringing along a lot of business with them in that move. Now, that's a significant cost in that loss. And these things are not often calculated. And when you look at the ROI on those losses, it's really important to look at, well, how can we invest that money differently to retain our current staff? Was it unreasonable for that person to ask for a 5% or 10% salary increase when that cost of turnover compared to the cost of losing that staff member and all that business going over to a competitor? So these things are important. So step 3 is really about harnessing what we call the voice of management, the voice of employees, and the voice of systems. And what we found through our research is that if you do this well, you have very robust solutions that are far more accurate, that will give you a far better probability of success in your business relative to performance, productivity, and so on. So what are these 3 things? The voice of management is really collecting the voice of management through a workshop, brainstorming sessions, interviews, or surveys. There are a variety of ways in which you can capture the voice of management. The voice of employees. Nowadays, you have a lot of employee engagement surveys, employee experience surveys, pulse surveys, opinion polls, even exit interviews. There is a wealth of data in these areas that is often not analyzed and not translated into action. So I highly recommend looking at that voice of employee side, the surveys, the exit interviews, and understanding why are people leaving your organization, or where are they dissatisfied within your team. Then we come to the voice of systems. And this is where you have your HR information system reports, your HR audit reports, board reports, and so on. They're often not utilized. So what we found is that the world has changed to some degree. Many organizations at different levels of systems maturity here, but many are now have some degree of HR information system, but they're not using it. They're not using it in a way that it's translated into insight, and it's not translated or triangulated with the other root causes into real action. So there is a real skills gap in data interpretation and communication and storytelling around the data that we've identified here as well. Having said that, this is also one of the greatest opportunities if you want to be better than your competitor, if you want to recruit staff from other teams. Getting to some of the root causes of, and triangulating this information will help you get there faster. This is one exercise where we did some root cause analysis with one organization. We looked at causes and root causes at the people level, recruitment level, their measures and systems, their capacity, employee value proposition, and we found a lot of factors that were really leading to the workforce shortage in their team. And sometimes it can be very surprising. We hear this one a lot: lack of career development or lack of pathways to growth, high levels of stress causing people to leave. For rural areas, housing opportunities, long commutes can be the cause, and also sort of no support requirements for measures. So lack of support from managers also being one of the causes. So there's often a lot of different root causes depending on the organization that you're working with. But when it comes to talent and talent recruitment, there are also a lot of questions around, where do I source the talent pool that we need, and how can we optimize the recruitment in my own department? We use structured tools like a talent acquisition maturity model that ask some very deep questions around your talent acquisition, what we call strategy. What sourcing channels are you using? How are you distributing job ads? How have you created your EVP or employee value proposition, your employer branding? going into that, how are you marketing those jobs at the moment? And what's the candidate experience like when they come in to the interview process? Are they having a good experience through those interviews when they submit their applications? Are they acknowledged? Does anyone get back to them once they've submitted their applications? Or are they having to call and chase up HR? And when they do the interviews, are managers actually selling the job well or not for the candidates that are very talented? Often there's a breakdown of communication, because whilst there might be a short talent pool, particularly in software, often there's a high demand for female engineers and so on. How is this being presented? How is the job being presented to those target market? And are there conditions in place in the workplace that you're communicating in the interview process that makes you attractive to those candidates as well? These questions are often not asked or analyzed properly. It depends on the maturity stage of the team, the organization. In terms of that talent maturity stage, we use specific tools to identify whether you're a foundational, intermediate, advanced, or predictive stage of talent acquisition. And those tools actually then help us work out where's the right area for you to focus in order to optimize your recruitment processes as well. Now, one of the things that we find at a fundamental level when it comes to, addressing these problems and root causes is really two things. We see a big, the big gaps is, on the one hand, in the left side of this diagram here, being the organization saying, what do we need from our employees at a foundational level? And often this is documented in what we call a workforce plan or a strategic workforce plan. That is often missing. So a view of what do we need in our organization in terms of the workforce, and we'll touch on that a little bit. And then what do the employees or the people need from the organization, conversely? This is often documented as an employee value proposition. These two foundational principles, these foundational questions are often not asked well, or when they do ask, result in a workforce plan and an EVP. And when you bring that together, that's really your HR strategy. That's really your people strategy. And that's really your people deal, right? So your people deal is when you have an alignment between the capabilities, engaged, and productive employees. And when you struck the right people deal, you've struck the right people deal when people in your team are happy, they're aligned, they feel well paid, and they're productive. The people deal can shift. So when people start to feel dissatisfied with their salary, when people start to feel they're working much harder than what they're worth, when people start to feel disconnected with other team members because of lack of accountability, because of poor communication and development or commercialization, that's when the people deal no longer occurs. And when that happens en masse, when that happens for 500 people, 5,000 people, 10,000 people, 50,000 people, and there's that real disconnect, we often see that the organization really hasn't got their EVP right, or they haven't got their workforce plan right, and they are not aligned. So it becomes more and more important to document these two components at a foundational level, the larger your organization is. And so it's really important to design your solutions and your solution portfolio to address the issues that come out of the EVP and the workforce planning exercise. You may come up with a lot of solutions. So it's really important to then categorize those solutions by quick wins, major projects, the money pit, or incremental gains is what we call it. These are categorized by the level of business impact and level of ease of implementation. So categorizing them in this way gives you a sense of, okay, we've got a lot of issues. We know we have a lot of opportunities and interventions that we can put in place. But what are the ones that are going to give us a quick win? Can we do some leadership development? Can we do some process automation? Can we do some talent and succession planning that we can do relatively quickly? On the other hand, the EVP might take a lot more work. Diversity and inclusion strategy may take a lot more work. These are judgment calls, depending on where you sit in the organization, how much resource you currently have, and how much capability you have in the team. But it's important to categorize them and pick the priorities that will deliver highest value and ROI to your team at any point in time, and sometimes also are politically appropriate as well. So that's a factor that needs to be taken into account. Now, we've seen a lot of news in terms of case studies, companies like Atlassian and Canva, multi-$10 billion companies that were the favorites in the Australian tech sector for many years, have really faced some degree of challenge in terms of workforce of late. Like all tech companies, went into big hiring recruitment drives right up until the end of last year or mid last year, and then now. These two companies in particular, Atlassian let go of a bunch of staff. Canva seems to be holding on, but both have introduced very stringent performance management processes and now rating employees on a 5 rating scale on a quarterly basis, or on a cyclical basis relative to the individual performance, and performance managing people out that are very low on that scale. So, and they're doing it in slightly different ways, but what's clear is that there's been a real focus on, okay, we're not going to, with these two companies, we're not going to lay off en masse anymore, but we're going to performance manage a lot tighter in order to make sure we retain the talent, but let's get rid of the bottom 5% or the bottom 10% of staff that are not performing or don't fit with the cultures, with the values, with the requirements of where the business is at the moment. A lot of these companies were known for, a bit of a playful, fun environment, and that trade-off was also married with the fact that, okay, we were playful and fun, but there were a lot of people also cruising and coasting. There's the phenomenon of quiet quitting, where people are at work, but they're doing other work, particularly for remote workers. There's another term called presenteeism, as opposed to absenteeism, which is, workers are present at work, but they're not actually doing work that they're supposed to be doing. They're actually doing other projects and personal side hustles as well. Now, a degree of side hustle is understandable, but when you're actually underperforming at work as well, or when the business is underperforming, these things need to be, or these behaviors need to be changed, or those persons should be managed out. So there's certain case studies here of how different companies are trying to do that. One of the things that we found is also a concept that has resonated really well. Now, many of you have heard of Simon Sinek, Start with Why. Many organizations are looking to their purpose and say, hey, look, maybe employees are not connecting with our purpose, and we need to reshape or re-articulate our purpose. And one of the things that I said that was a little bit controversial yesterday at a HR conference that I was speaking at, but ended up getting from some very positive feedback, was that, look, most employees or people that you work with are not necessarily super concerned about the company's purpose, other than how it connects with their own interests and their own purpose, right? You might have the best purpose in the world, but the day you stop paying people, see what happens to your employees. Do they still work with you because they love your purpose, or do they work elsewhere? Because it's all about, is it aligned to their own individual role and purpose? Now, Simon Sinek talked about start with why, and companies are going back to their why. But honestly, that was about 15 years ago. The world's changed and the thinking has evolved and matured in very significant ways. Many leading organizations are thinking about the ikigai, which is a much more structured way about finding your why as an individual. If you haven't heard about the ikigai is a Japanese concept around how to find your purpose. And they've structured it in a very clear fashion. I started using that around 2012, which I've had about 11 years of experience doing this and facilitating this work. Books started coming out around this work in 2015, 2016. So there's really been an evolution in that. And now some companies and organizations are working out or helping employees work out their own ikigai. And this is the convergence of 4 quadrants, which is, what do you love? or what are you interested, what do you really enjoy doing? What are you good at? So what are your strengths? What can you get paid for? So what's the role and how much can you get paid for it? And then what's the problem you're trying to solve in the world, or you're trying to solve in your job or in your community that you love solving? When you actually converge the four, that's when you get to your ikigai. This is when you derive the highest value for yourself, but also provide the highest value to your organization, your community, the world in general. And so it's really, really important to find your ikigai, to work through that internal compass, but also for if you're in HR or team leader, to help your team do that and then connect that with their vision and purpose. Because sometimes people don't deliver a good customer experience, they don't deliver a good employee experience with their colleagues because they just don't care about their jobs. They're just doing it for the money, and they will not go that extra mile to deliver a good customer experience or deliver a product or a project in the right way. But when people connect with their ikigai and they see how it's aligned with their own growth and purpose and so on, and they really feel that deep connection, there is a transformation of outputs and effort. I was speaking as I said, at a conference recently, and I talked about how we did this work with nurses during COVID. Now, many of you may not be aware, but there were more nurses died during COVID compared to doctors. And, we talk about burnout and fatigue and so on. This was actually death in a certain workforce. But many people were obviously also very fatigued at that time doing these sorts of roles. But for some of, and they said, look, Avi, I don't know if I'm going to stay in this job anymore. I feel like I'm going to quit. I'm burning out. I'm fatigued. But when they did the ikigai exercise, something really interesting happened. The mindset around it shifted when they did the ikigai to say, hey, you know what? I may be a nurse, but this is my purpose. This is why I'm here. This is why I chose this job. I chose to be in these situations. I chose to help people through the darkest times in their health and during the COVID period. And when it became sort of active in their consciousness that this was an act of free will to be in these roles, to live their purpose during these hard times, then the stress actually reduced. And there was a greater acceptance of how their role connected to what they want to do and not what they're being forced to do. So this is a really, really important concept that I wanted to stress, because it is an evolution in management thinking around people, connection, purpose, and so on. But there are ways in which to, structure this in a more quantifiable manner. So one of our steps is about articulating your strategy on a page. There are many ways in which to do that. This is a sort of very high level workforce plan that I won't go into the detail. But what I want to just touch on very quickly here is that when you have certain roles in the organization, there are ways in which you can categorize those roles into role families and so on. But what's really important is if you're thinking about the next 12 months of your team, of your organization, of your capacity, what are the roles we're going to need in order for us to be successful over the next 1 year, over the next 3 years, over the next 5 years? It's important to think about and quantify that in terms of permanent workforce, variable workforce, but also to look at the capability level of that workforce at the moment on a scale of 1 to 5. Is it a 1? Is it a 2? Is it a 5? And then to look at what are the capability changes required for the future. So in this example, and when we talk about workforce planning, we talk about what's the capacity you need, what's the capability you need, and what's the composition you need of the workforce in the next 1, 3, and 5 years, right? So if you have a product development team and you have this, a senior software engineer, for example, you may say, well, in the next 1 year, from a technical perspective, we may need more AI coding skills, for example, in certain languages like Python or so on, or we may need additional soft skills in our team. We've noticed that team communication, team collaboration is very poor. People are arguing each other around sort of accountabilities and so on, and clarity on deliverables, or even understanding what customer requirements are, whether that's an external customer or whether that's an internal customer. We're not good at actually collecting those requirements. Or alternatively, it might be project management skills that are lacking, and perhaps it's time for some of the senior guys to actually adopt some of that in order for them to escalate or evolve to become product managers in future. So you've got to really map out clearly what those capability gaps are and what are the changes required. And based on those changes that you require for the future, work out what those solutions are in terms of recruitment, what the development plans are. Do we reduce headcount? Do we redesign roles? Do we outsource roles because we're never going to get that capability in Australia, for example, and we're going to need to outsource that? Or do we change our reward and remuneration packages so it's more attractive in the marketplace, so we attract people from the talent pool? There's obviously a cost to that. Or do we performance manage differently? Or do we start better performance management because we're not doing it very well at the moment? Our managers are not actually equipped to do that performance management. So there are a range of options in which how you can handle these particular challenges. Now, step 7 is about implementing, measuring, and improving. Now, we've done some work using this 8-step methodology at organizations. This is one case study from an organization called Legend, where we did this process. We went through 5 steps of the process. There was a high we call it user experience rating of going through that process. They were experiencing, very high turnover, a cost of turnover, more than $500,000 at the time. And in moving through this process, we saw some very significant efficiency gains, up to 32% efficiency in their whole planning process by going through a very systematic approach through this, which enabled them to actually see a very quick 5% improvement in engagement scores, 10% reduction in employee turnover. And the organization overall saw a 35% improvement in profit per employee during the period of the work. Now, we can't say that the work directly attributed to profit because there are many factors involved in profit, but we did see that improvement occur over time. But what they said was that, this process actually provides structured techniques so that, your people management, your HR side can be practiced in the same discipline as other management disciplines like finance. So there's real evidence around these steps that help improve efficiency gain, ROI gain, and so on. And we're doing more and more of that work across not only tech industry, but also other industries, auditing, healthcare, various others as well. Finally, it's about aligning your enablers, which can be your systems and processes. We've seen a lot of those layoffs occur, particularly in the US in the tech sector earlier this year. There've been some massive layoffs, Alphabet 12,000, Amazon 10,000, and so on and so forth. What's interesting, a lot of those layoffs also did occur in shared services. So I think in Microsoft, about a third of those were in shared services, including HR. So how do those people now manage that workload in a very overwhelmed workforce before? Many organizations are bringing in new technologies to do that, to embed the change, to better forecast better, to better roster and schedule staff better. And obviously ChatGPT is just been one of those technologies that's being used more in the HR space to give you better solutions or provide recommendations for solution generation. We certainly use it for some of that, but it's not 100% reliable. It's not 100% secure. There are confidentiality and privacy issues. So all these need to be taken into account as you embed new systems and processes, including your HR information systems. But you really got to work through and align those opportunities with what I talked about before, with the root causes, with the priorities that have come up from management, from employees in your systems. Don't just adopt them because it's a good idea, because everyone's talking about it, because you've had a play and you've tested it and it looks cool. Really do some strategic work and align it, because all these take time, investment, and organizational change in order to adopt as well. So moving forward, there's some very, very significant growth opportunities for you. We've talked a little bit about, in summary, for business growth to grow, to increase revenue, profitability, and reduce costs. There's work to be done around what we call strategic HR alignment. That's certainly a big hotspot that we can help with. There's work to be done for many organizations around optimizing recruitment, improving that recruitment process, that talent acquisition maturity, and developing or crystallizing your employee value proposition as well, or employer branding. Some organizations, we're helping to do scheduling optimization or roster optimization. So there's a certain amount of systems in place, certain amount of data involved, but really the productivity levels of certain types of workforce, whether it's nursing, auditing, project managers, or software engineers. When you get to a larger size of organization, then figuring out how to actually roster and schedule them in an optimal way can be quite complex. And so we're doing some of that work. For those thinking longer term, workforce planning, as we talked about in summary, is really looking at and mapping out the requirements of your business over the next 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years. And so how do you do that in a systematic way that looks at the 3 C's we talked about? Capability, composition, and capacity is really important. And we've done a lot of work around that. Of course, on the left side here, many organizations are still trying to work out how do I solve some of my employee experience issues along with the well-being side to address burnout. And some organizations are trying to figure out, well, how can I use better analytics or AI to address some of these issues? Again, we're doing some work in that to bring a lot of that together to help organizations work through that challenge. I'd certainly love to talk to you if that's an area of interest. And finally, particularly as I mentioned, I've been speaking at HR conferences, and a lot of data has come out that one of the capabilities for not just HR, but for leaders moving forward is that skill of strategic leadership, which is becoming a real competence that's lacking, that's clearly lacking. And our research has shown that, but it's also one of the biggest opportunities because you can upskill in that area. You can upskill in strategic thinking. You can upskill in strategic people management. You can upskill in strategic HR leadership. And so we've been launching, along with our books, skills development, training programs, and coaching leaders and executives in this space in order to enable that growth. Because as your people grow, your business grows. Right, people growth, business growth, there is a clear alignment around that. And so we're happy to have that conversation with you. And where possible, align it with your purpose as well, with your individual purpose and your role purpose, because that's a piece of work that's also very exciting, fresh for many organizations, and an area of competency and interest that's really growing in the business world over the last few years. And certainly there's a lot of data to show that businesses that adopt some of these behaviors actually grow much faster than businesses that don't. And that's strong evidence for that as well. So I've shared a lot of information here. Thank you for your attention. This brings me to some of the summary around the outcomes. So we talked about some of the economic challenges. We talked about the people deal, which is crafting the workforce plan with the EVP, the alignment of what does the organization need from its employees, with what do the employees need from its organization? How do you bring that together? We talked about some of the practical approaches for engagement and motivation and purpose to build that resilience. We talked about the importance of aligning your EVP to attract the right demographics and the example around female engineers. And we talked about some of the case studies that are real, that we've worked on, plus what we're observing in the marketplace as well. A couple of opportunities for you in terms of free resources and paid resources. Obviously, you'll be getting the presentation summary as a result of signing up to this webinar. You will also have the opportunity to purchase the book. The soft copy link is available to you, and you can use this discount code HRBook40, which will give you a 40% discount on the book, which is very attractive, obviously. But for those of you who want a paper copy, we now have just launched a very limited supply of paperback copies as well, which I'm really excited about. For those, please email us directly, because they are sort of a limited rare edition. I am autographing some of them as well, which is a really exciting exercise, but feel free to email us if you're interested in those as well. Finally, thank you very much for your time. I'm Avi Ratnanason. Be well, do good. And I'd like to close off here. And for those of you who like to stay on and ask questions, I'm here to answer your questions in the next 5 to 10 minutes as well. So thank you very much. We'll now open for questions. And for those of you who have questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box. One of the things that we do in our sort of leadership and coaching framework is really looking at self first. So this whole area of self being, understanding your own personality, your own values, your areas of well-being, purpose, as we talked about, communication styles, so how you communicate and how that relates to how your employees or team members communicate, as well as technical competencies. What are the skills and technical competencies that you have as a leader? In addition to that, then there's also the self. So your team, how you manage teams, your executive, your board, your owners and investors also plays a factor. Then it's about how you manage the organization. Here's about, managing, helping and coaching leaders around your strategy, call it balanced scorecard, your 90-day execution plan, which is the 8-step methodology, your financials, people and culture, customers, competitors, IT, regulators and suppliers. And finally, it's also how you manage your significant others. These are your family, friends, and community that also have an impact on performance. So where we do that, more deep level of coaching with leaders, people managers, executives, board members, and so on, it's really important to look at these areas of self, teams, organization, and the significant others as well, because that holistic view is what affects performance ultimately of a leader. And we know leaders play a very big role in the performance of an overall team and developing a healthy organization, whether it's an IT and digital company or any other organization as well. So thank you very much for that question.